From the European Parliament here in Brussels, this is Raw Politics. Thanks for joining us. Here's what's coming up tonight. More likely by the day, Europe's chief Brexit negotiator sounds the alarm over a no-deal departure. Irish rights, why Irish citizens in Northern Ireland say Brexit is threatening their rights. NATO fractures, the US and Germany squabble over spending as the alliance marks 70 years. Italy rift, Matteo Salvini and Jean-Claude Juncker bicker over Italy's economy. And Brexit laid bare. Protesters steal the spotlight at Westminster in tonight's Raw Moments. Very good evening. Welcome to the programme. It's time to meet our panellists tonight. First up, we've got Shada Islam. She is Director of Policy at Friends of Europe. What is taking your attention tonight?
This war of words between Italy and Brussels. It's not just about the economy, it's about politics, it's about immigration. Interesting. It
is indeed, and we will be looking at that a little bit later. Also, we've got Daniel Hannan. He is a British MEP from the European Conservatives and Reformists. Dan, what about you? What's got your attention?
I was quite interested in your NATO story. NATO's been looking for something to do for 30 years now, right? In a completely logical world, in 1989, they'd have awarded themselves a medal and retired with honour. So they've been casting around ever since for a way to justify their role, sometimes successfully, sometimes not.
And also joining us tonight, we've got Matt Carthy. He is an Irish MEP from the European United Left. Matt, what about you?
I'm Irish. It's Brexit all the time, unfortunately, and it is getting to the point where it's becoming really, really concerning for people from my constituency and across our country.
And indeed, for people in Britain and across Europe, and that is where we begin tonight. The mood is growing darker here in Brussels as the UK once again failed to vote for a Brexit solution last night. The EU sees the prospect of the UK leaving without a deal becoming more and more likely as next Friday's deadline draws closer. For Brexit watchers, last night's debate had a slightly familiar feel.
The ayes were 273, the noes were 276. So the noes have it.
All four votes on Brexit compromises were rejected. The one that came closest to success, a proposal to keep the UK in the customs union, failed by just 3 votes. It was the 15th time Parliament voted down a Brexit solution. The options open to Theresa May are narrowing by the day. The message from the Brexit chief negotiator, Michel Barnier, today was clear. If the UK can't break its own political deadlock, well, then the EU stands ready to protect itself.
No deal was never our desired or intended scenario. No deal was never my desired or intended scenario. But the EU27 is now prepared. It becomes day after day more likely.
And listen to this from the Brexit coordinator here in the European Parliament, Guy Verhofstadt. A more dire tone. He tweeted that the House of Commons again votes against all options. A hard Brexit becomes nearly inevitable. On Wednesday, the UK has a last chance to break the deadlock or face the abyss. Matt, let's start with you first of all. Michel Barnier says a no deal is now more likely. In fact, he said this morning, very likely. Do you think it is?
I think it's a live prospect, there's no question about it. And as I said at the outset, that's a really concerning prospect for anybody that has an interest in Ireland economically, certainly, but more importantly, just as crucially, politically and socially. And that's where the crux of this backstop, as it is termed, that has been missing, I think, by a lot of Brexiteers, in particular in Britain, that this is more than just economically concerning. So I come from a few short miles south of the border. As far as I'm concerned, the people who live on the far side of the border are as Irish as me. We have to put in place the protections that ensures that they can fulfil their own identity as much as those people who consider themselves to be British.
If there is a no-deal Brexit, whose fault is it? Does Europe have to take responsibility for it?
I'm somebody who...
Why not, though? Takes two to negotiate.
I'm somebody who is always willing and able to criticise the European institutions on many occasions. But the truth of the matter is that Britain created this mess. The people of England and Wales voted to leave the EU. Theresa May set out a contradiction at the heart of her Brexit strategy when she said in the one instance that her intention was to remove Britain from the European Customs Union and take the North out, but at the same time not have any hardening of the border. That's a contradiction that the British have never put forward any proposition to deal with. And the only deal that has been put forward has been the backstop, which Theresa May, on behalf of the British government, actually signed up to.
Daniel, we heard from Michel Barnier today suggesting that the choices were now no deal, a long extension, or passing Theresa May's deal still.
That would be my order of preference.
That would be your order of preference. So you would prefer to leave with no deal?
Yes, and I mean, this is not my preferred outcome from the beginning, right? I'd much rather that we'd gone for an EFTA-type arrangement, which would, unlike the customs union, have addressed the Irish border issues. But I'm afraid we're up against a complete inflexibility on this question of trying to keep Britain in a customs union. I mean, this is what the backstop is really about. The UK made clear right at the beginning that it would not erect any physical infrastructure at the Irish border, that it was willing to work with Dublin and with Brussels on any reasonable proposals to avoid infrastructure on the other side, and that the best way of doing that would be a deep and comprehensive free trade agreement. We've swallowed all of the other nasties in the withdrawal agreement. Nobody really thinks we owe £39 billion. We've accepted the asymmetric arbitration system, the continuing role for the European Court, but we can't accept that Brussels should in perpetuity control our trade with third countries, which is what's now being proposed.
Just to put this, but you stood under the Vote Leave banner campaign for, which said that taking back control is a careful change, not a sudden stop. We will negotiate the terms of a new deal before we start any legal processes to leave.
Yes.
How does no deal fit in under a careful change and not a sudden stop?
Yeah, but that was the single biggest mistake, that instead of doing that, Theresa May triggered Article 50 not only without having put all of her contingency plans in place, but incredibly without a very clear idea of what she wanted.
But all I'm arguing is that no one voted for no deal. The British public did not vote for no deal.
Well, actually, that's not quite right. When Parliament voted to trigger Article 50, it did so on the basis that after 2 years we would cease to be a member, deal or no deal. Now, I think we should have done quite a lot of preparation before we got to that point, but that was the vote that an overwhelming majority of MPs made.
Shada, while all this is happening and these debates are happening with politicians and votes in Westminster, what do the rest of us make of this? What do the people watching this programme have to make of this? We kind of look at this drama, but it's got potentially very real consequences at the end of next week.
Absolutely. It's a tragedy. It's a shambles. And what I think, ideally, Darren, we should have a second vote. A second referendum. That is what we need. This is an impasse. No one's going anywhere. It's the blame game. And meanwhile, the people, many people, are really worried. I mean, but the food industry is worried. You know, what about the trade deals? I was with Indian experts today. The world is laughing at Britain, but the world is also laughing at Europe. So the quality of our leadership is so poor. We used to stand up to the rest of the world and say, look, this is the way you should do things. This is how Parliament works. This is democracy. We can't really do that.
But how is a second referendum the answer? I mean, I know this is often the answer in Brussels. They've done it twice in Ireland. They've done it in Denmark. You know, we don't like the result. Go away and try again. We'll say it more slowly for you. But really, is ignoring the biggest vote because you don't think...
Or enabling people to have a second chance. Knowing more.
Well, there was not a single person on either side who at the time did not say, this is it, it's final, it's binding. In fact, the people on the Remain side said that especially loudly, aggressively, one might almost say. There's never going to be another vote. It's now on never. Don't imagine that, you know, John Major, Nick Clegg, Paddy Ashdown, they were absolutely unequivocal that there would never be a second referendum. So when they now come back and say, oh, yeah, but let's have another one, and this time we really mean it, this time we actually will abide by the result, why on earth should anyone take that seriously?
There were 1 million people, more than 1 million people out in the streets. There are people out there really demanding. What's wrong with it? Why are you so afraid to do a second referendum?
It's not about being afraid.
But, I mean, clearly, why can't we do it? People change their minds.
First of all, there weren't 1 million people on the street. That has been absolutely fact-checked to death. Secondly, even if we pretend that there were 1 million, even if we pretend there were 1 million, that is still less than the margin by which Leave won.
Well, let's just deal with
we are not a country governed by street demonstrations. We're a country governed by the ballot box.
Based on lies.
Let's deal with the cards that are on the table. We're faced with, as you say, 3 prospects, all of which at the moment seem like impossible possibilities, to consider a scenario where there would be a second referendum or a revocation, impossible to see how it would happen. Had Theresa May's deal been passed, impossible to see how it would happen. No deal Brexit, impossible to see how anyone could let it happen. Yet, within a couple of weeks, one of those impossibilities is going to have happened. And the difficulty from an Irish perspective is that the challenges that presents, not only, as I say, to our economic, but to the Good Friday Agreement. And I think that's where Daniel misses the point fundamentally. You consider the north of Ireland just to be the same as any other part of Britain. It's not. It's a contested territory that is underpinned by a peace agreement that was a long time in the making, and that can unravel very quickly. And that's what the British government are currently...
Just hold on, because we're just going to bring in, actually, just the perspective of someone else, someone who may be affected by a no-deal Brexit, whose livelihood and business would be directly affected, and that is Cart Bertson, who owns a family-run exporting business of plants, where the vast majority of those exports actually go to the United Kingdom. Cart, thank you very much indeed for joining us near Ghent in Belgium. Just explain how impacted your business would be in the event that in just over a week's time the UK left with no deal.
Good evening. It's a real nightmare for us. We, from the start, when we heard about Brexit, we were concerned because it's our main market. And we've been trying to get ready, but the problem is that we don't know what to get ready for.
And in regards to you don't know what to get ready for, who do you blame for that? Because the European Union repeatedly say that they have got lots of plans in place for no deal. Have you heard from them? Have you heard from the Belgian government?
Yes, we've put everything into place, but the problem is from a hard Brexit to a certain time, a period of time that gives us the chance to prepare. That's what we hoped for, and that's what more unlikely to happen.
And just to kind of talk about, I mean, your business is clearly very important to you. Do you genuinely think that if you cannot, or there are impediments to stop you exporting to the UK, in just over a week's time, that might be it, that your business has got no alternative? Can you not find another place to sell your goods?
For 25 years, we've been focusing on the UK. We really know the market very well. We know our customers. We've been, focusing on that one. So it's not easy to get out, and that's not our intention. But it's what's frustrating is that it will cost us extra effort, and it will cost us a lot of money, and it will not improve the quality of our plants, of our service. That's the problem.
And just very finally, I mean, you say you're concerned. How worried are you as well?
Well, we are very worried, but yes, there's not a lot we can do. That's the problem. We hope that there would be a real sense of urgency, and that the British government would really, take a decision. And that doesn't happen. That's the problem.
It is concerning for lots of people. Thank you very much for joining us, and nice to see one of the plants there in the background. Now, let's discuss this a little bit further. Joining us is Pauline Basseton, who is the head of the European Policy and Brexit at the Freight Transport Association. Also still with us, of course, is Matt and Daniel as well. Pauline, let's start with you. That is a particular example, one particular case, particularly exposed, it should be said, to the UK market. What are you hearing from other businesses across the continent about their concerns, at least based on the uncertainty of not knowing what's going to happen next?
Similar messages. I think business have stopped listening to politicians. We're just now preparing for a no deal on the 12th of April, which is the default legal situation. So you have three groups of businesses. You have the ones who have been preparing for a long time, usually large companies. They're still very frustrated because there are a number of things that, a number of questions they have which are still without any answers. There are some easements that have been secured thanks to our hard work, but these easements eventually will expire. Then you have those who are essentially only starting to prepare, only starting to see what they need to do. They've done some things, but not everything. And you have the ones, especially on the continent, who are just saying, well, this is just too much, so
What was it? Is it too much, though, or are they being a little bit irresponsible? Why are they not reacting? This is not potentially very far off.
When you have official guidance from the UK government, when you have the Prime Minister of the UK saying repeatedly that no deal is a very unlikely outcome until extremely recently, is business the one being irresponsible, or are politicians being irresponsible?
Well, let's put that to some politicians. It's not been terribly clear. Clearly, there is an awful lot of uncertainty out there. That's not good for business.
Of course it's not. But we are here because...
But have politicians made that uncertainty worse?
Well, the reason we're in this position is that the EU is making of the UK a demand that it wouldn't make of any other country for permanent control of our trade policy and the regulatory annexation of part of our territory. I mean, imagine if it had said to Canada during the trade talks, we'll only sign a trade deal if you give us regulatory control of Quebec and we control your trade. And by the way, we might not even give you the trade deal after. I mean, of course we're not going to sign up to that.
But isn't the...
That's not what happened. That's not what happened. Let's make, just to clarify, the proposal put forward by the European Union was a backstop that covered the north of Ireland. It was Theresa May's proposal that would encompass the entire United Kingdom, as she would see it, and then turned around a number of weeks later and said, no British Prime Minister would ever see it. The reason we're in the difficulty that we're in is because of British government bad faith. Let's just go back to the Good Friday Agreement, because there are a number of underpinning principles. One is the principle of consent. That is where everybody agreed, Irish Republicans as well as everybody else, that there'd be no constitutional change to the status of the north of Ireland.
This is a constitutional change.
The constitutional change is removing the north from the EU. That's the big constitutional change against the democratically expressed wishes of the majority who voted. The second thing is the rights of people in the north to be British, Irish or both. The British government is already undermining that right by telling people that they are by default British. The third important consideration in the Good Friday Agreement and principle is the route to Irish unity through democratic means. That's where Daniel's position is creating the scope for, because the bad will that we have seen coming from the British side throughout this entire process, remember, they haven't put forward a single proposition to deal with the border issues, and is it any wonder then why businesses across the EU have been left in the limbo that they have?
Let's pause that there, because you picked up on something, and there's been an awful lot of talk about Northern Ireland, and some Irish and dual citizens there have taken to social media today to warn that their rights are under threat because of Brexit. But are they really? Well, Alex Morgan and his team are at the Cube at Euronews headquarters and have more on that. Alex.
Hello, Darren. Well, we really are just days away, aren't we, from what was an extended Brexit deadline. And here we are having these conversations, asking these questions. And look, I can tell you, we have been going through the tangles of this all day. It is a very complicated, very niche issue that's actually been brought up here. And we are, at this stage, coming to talk to you now, waiting still for a clear answer from the UK authorities. But let's take you through where all this came from today. This is Emma de Souza. This is a tweet she posted. She is living in Northern Ireland. She holds Irish nationality, but she was born in the north. Why does all this matter? Well, you'll remember Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom. Of course, the south is the Republic. But under the Good Friday Agreement, people can identify as Irish, British, or both. So this, Emma was saying, is fine until Brexit comes along. She says here, well, now the Home Office, she says, is redefining the definition of an EU national. Only Irish citizens will remain an EU national after Brexit. They're saying they're imposing British citizenship on the people of Northern Ireland. She's suggesting here there'll be a blanket imposition of British citizenship. Now, why? Well, after Brexit, there'll be this EU settlement scheme where people will be able to apply to stay in the UK. It's very important to say the British government and the Irish government saying Irish citizens don't have to do it, but they can do it. Well, Emma is saying people born in the south can apply and get on paper a guarantee of their rights, but if you were born in Northern Ireland, her legal default position is British. She's saying she's considered as British as well as Irish. She doesn't want that. And this is cutting to a real central question here. It is a question of identity. And her case, relating to a rather niche court case about wanting access to full EU family rights relating to her husband, has sparked wider concerns and a wider conversation on social about how people identify. Look at this tweet here. People saying here, thank you to everyone for the solidarity. The people of the island voted for the Good Friday Agreement and the right to be Irish or British or both. It's to remind the UK government they cannot have both, you know, you can't be stripping people away. There's also other tweets here. Born and bred in Belfast in Ireland. I'm as Irish as anybody born in Dublin. That, of course, is the south of Ireland, saying we cannot have two tiers of people who consider themselves to be Irish. And then let's bring this one here. This hashtag, we've been seeing a lot of this. We are Irish too. This is people now saying we do not want to be considered British by default. We want to have the chance to apply for the same EU settlement schemes, even if we were born in the north of Ireland, in the UK. It's niche, it's technical, but it's coming down to a question of identity. People say here saying, as you can see, I will never hold a UK passport. I was born Irish. I will die Irish. Now, it is worth saying, we have not seen the tone from the UK authorities or the Irish authorities suggesting that anybody should be having to surrender a sense of who they are. But you can see here a real sense of concern. And on that particular question about whether people born in the north will still be able to apply for EU schemes or whether they will be legally considered default UK and Irish, we are waiting for a detailed response from the UK authorities. We'll have that in a full Euronews article. But Darren, you can see here, just days away from Brexit, people are anxious, people want clarity, and we hopefully will give some of that on euronews.com. So do check us out there.
Alex, thank you very much indeed. Interesting stuff there. Matt, I'll get a quick reaction from you first of all. Is there any substance to this, you think? Have you heard anything in regards from what the Irish government have said about this potential denial, as some would see it, of the EU citizenship if they're born in the north of Ireland?
Well, clearly there will be a diminution of rights. For example, the rest of the citizens of the EU will have a right to elect members to the European Parliament. Citizens in the north of Ireland won't, even though they are by right under international law Irish citizens. And Emma, the Sousa case that has been mentioned there has shown that when an Irish citizen has interacted with the British Home Office, they have told her that you are by default, British citizen. And this goes to the heart of why the backstop is needed. Because even though we celebrate the Good Friday Agreement, there is numerous aspects of that agreement that haven't actually been adhered to in legislation by the British government. So people, quite rightly, across Ireland are saying we need legally enforceable guarantees from the British government in relation to our border.
Irrespective of this particular case, but what it has done, it has stoked up, not just in Northern Ireland, but elsewhere in the UK, a stronger sense of nationalism within the United Kingdom. Do you think in some ways Brexit has been bad for the UK as a country?
Well, first, on the specific story, the UK government, unlike, by the way, almost any other government in the world, always, since long before the Good Friday Agreement, allowed people in part of its territory to claim the citizenship and carry the passport of another country. And one of the reasons that it did so is because in every town in mainland Britain, you have Irish connections. In fact, virtually in every family, including mine. So we have a continuing interest in the prosperity and success of our one land neighbour, which is why it is such a pity that when we are offering all versions of avoiding a border on our side, short of joining a permanent customs union, no one is prepared to engage with them.
Okay. Pauline, just very quickly, one-word answer if you can. We heard from the EU today suggesting they are fully ready for a no-deal Brexit. Are they, yes or no?
Of course not. No one is.
OK, thank you. That's quite a scary thought. Thank you very much indeed all for joining us. Much appreciated. Brexit, the ongoing saga. I'm sure we'll come back to this tomorrow. We're going to take a quick break, though, here on Raw Politics. Divisions are front and centre as NATO members convene in Washington for the alliance's 70th birthday. Plus, Jean-Claude Juncker heads to Italy amid growing tensions between Brussels and Rome. But who has the upper hand? That's all next on Raw Politics. Welcome back to Raw Politics. Now, this week, it's Happy Birthday NATO, as the military alliance prepares to celebrate its 70th anniversary. But celebrations have been muted, and some blame America for spoiling the party. US President Donald Trump has criticised NATO publicly and undermined it economically, and many fear the alliance could be permanently damaged. NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg will meet the US President in Washington today. Ahead of that sit-down, he set a realistic tone.
We have to be frank and recognize that there are disagreements between NATO allies. There is no way anyone can deny that, because just by reading newspapers or watching the television, you see that NATO allies disagree on many issues. We see serious disagreements on issues like trade, energy, climate change, the Iran nuclear deal, and also other issues.
Now, for what to expect tonight, I'm joined by Alexander Vershbow. He is a former US ambassador to NATO and was Deputy Secretary General of the Alliance from 2012 to 2016 and joined us, I think, via Skype. Alexander, are you there?
I'm here. Can you see me?
Well, we can certainly hear you. There we go. We can see you now. How are you? We're going to ask you first, what can we expect tonight? Alexander, are we going to see kind of divisions front and centre?
Well, it's possible, because with President Trump's obsession with the disparity in defense spending, he could have another one of his well-known tantrums, as he did at the summit in Brussels last July. But I hope that that will not be the dominant theme, because NATO is actually in pretty good shape at age 70, certainly fit enough to go another 10, 20, 30 years. And on policy, whether it's deterrence against Russia or trying to deal with some of the new threats and challenges, NATO continues to show its adaptability and its resilience. So it's a kind of paradox. The Trump administration has continued to support NATO, has been the architect of some new initiatives to increase the readiness of allied forces. Yet the President of the United States doesn't quite agree with everybody in his administration. So it's always a bit of a crapshoot what's going to happen when one of these high-level meetings takes place.
Indeed it is, and we'll have to wait and see what does happen tonight. Is the pressure, though, then actually on Europe, on countries like Germany, for example, to try and meet even that 1.5% target, but at least that 2% target that Trump has been kind of banging on about for the last couple of years?
Well, Germany's one of the main laggards. They're not the only one. Italy, another big ally, a founding member of NATO, is down at about 1.2% of GDP. And Canada, the Netherlands, also not performing as well as they should be. So Trump does have a point, even if his manner and methodology is rather obnoxious. And this is kind of a fault line in the alliance that could get worse if allies don't get more serious, particularly when the United States is paying more attention to China as the long-term strategic challenge. Europe needs to be in a position to carry more of the load inside NATO for NATO's sake, but also for Europe's sake. So again, Trump's method may be a little bit unbearable, but he has a point.
And just very finally, Alexander, yes or no, will NATO be celebrating its 80th birthday?
Mm-hmm. I think it will be, and not as a deceased alliance, but as a living alliance that is still prospering. I think, unfortunately, in 10 years, we're probably still going to be dealing with a hostile Russia. So maintaining and strengthening deterrence against Russia is going to be still at the top of the charts. But other threats, including China, which is a challenge for Europe, too. It's not so far away as it expands its infrastructure cooperation, its global navy, its activities up in the Arctic. China is something that Europe has to pay more attention to as well. So NATO will have a role in that, and it'll still be alive and kicking at its 80th birthday.
Good. Well, there we go. Optimism, at least, from Alexander Vershbow. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Now, here to discuss this is Arnhem Layets, who is a German MEP who sits with the Socialists and Democrats, Bodil Valero, who is a Swedish MEP who sits with the Greens and the EFA group, and Andrew Byrne, who's a Brussels correspondent with the Sunday Times. Arnhem, let's start with you, first of all. Are you as optimistic as our guest there, that NATO is in robust health?
Well, first of all, also happy birthday for me. I grew up in East Germany behind the Iron Curtain, and I learned how to throw bombs in high school in order to protect myself. So I was living in the Cold War, and now we are under the protection of NATO to have peace. And we also have peace treaties, the INF Treaty, which is under threat. So here I see a general question bringing up on that one. But NATO is an important alliance, and we have to rebuild and reorganize ourselves.
So if it's so important, then why is Germany refusing to get to the 2% target that NATO has set itself in terms of defence spending?
Well, that's a very important point. I became a new member here to the Parliament, and the agreement on the 2% is before we really reopened a whole new discussion in Europe. We are now talking about a European defence structure. We are talking about a European defence fund. So it's on pooling and sharing, bringing our capacity together. We are not as coherent as we could be. We are spending billion of money, of euros, which we could use much better. So it's not a question of 2%, it's a question of pooling and sharing of efficiency. And that is the new debate we have to bring up. Germany has to really invest in all their capacity in order that our military is working well, but we have to reopen this discussion with a new European defence structure, and I hope we will get there.
So, Bodil, the response then from the Germans is essentially, it's not about the amount you spend, it's about how efficient you are. For sure. Do you agree?
Yes, I agree totally. I come from a non-NATO country, and there we first ask ourselves, what do we need? And then we pay for what we need. We don't put a target that we have to spend so much of our budget to reach that target. The capacity, the defence capacity, is the most important. And as a Green, my whole group, we do think in the same way. It's not about the money, it's about what do we get out of that money. In many cases, the countries, just to reach up more the level, what we can do is to buy arms. But if we don't have pilots for the planes, we don't need the planes. You know?
But ultimately, though, you know, NATO is protecting all of Europe, not just the countries that belong to it in a sense. Don't you feel with still a threatened Russia, with a potentially encroaching China, that actually NATO's role is more important than ever?
I think that, well, we already have NATO. Sweden has a lot of cooperation with NATO. We are many times more NATO than the NATO countries, according to NATO themselves, because we do have a lot of cooperation. But for us and for our country, it has been always the idea that if we join NATO, for example, then that is more of a threat to us, as we have Russia as close.
Okay. Well, you're Irish, Andrew. You're also not in NATO. What's your kind of take on
as a journalist, I can't join the NATO alliance, but it's true that Ireland is not. I mean, I think the problem with the transatlantic alliance as it is now is that all of the countries most of them are living in different universes. You have the US on the one side with Trump and his sort of ambiguous or ambivalent commitment to the alliance and his hammering of Germany on this 2% spending limit. And on the other hand, you have, well, if you take, for instance, Germany, as you mentioned, the defence spending limit is not reached. And you also have a country which refuses, I mean, German politicians refuse to acknowledge that Russia is the primary military threat on the European continent. They refuse to acknowledge it.
So much so that they're taking their gas.
Indeed. And so is it any surprise why you have Central and Eastern European countries who are on the border with Russia, who feel nervous about their security with an ambivalent Trump White House, a Germany which can't even agree to name the primary threat it faces. And then on other European countries, I mean, I take your point that Sweden is not a NATO member, but there's an element of hypocrisy in that. I mean, Sweden is one of the world's biggest arms exporters. Your country and your parties in government there exports weapons, missile technology to Saudi Arabia, to United Arab Emirates.
We stopped it mostly.
Well, I mean, a little belatedly.
Thanks to us.
So this is the kind of divided kind of view of the world that the transatlantic alliance is facing.
And coming back, you know, Germany is an economic powerhouse. I mean, given, obviously, for obvious reasons with history, it's not a military powerhouse, but it is a member of NATO. And Donald Trump is perfectly right to say you are getting all the benefits of your membership and you're not prepared, as a major world economy, to contribute. Why should America disproportionately pay money to protect Germany?
Thank you for this point. First of all, we have to do our homework, and our German defense spending needs to be actually reset, that we have 100% function opportunities. We are not there, actually. So
you've got such a problem in Germany, you can't even recruit Germans to the army. I mean, it's a pretty dire situation, just relying on everyone else to protect you.
Well, first of all, let me try to finish my argument. A colleague of mine, Fritz Felgentreu, our defense spokesperson in the German Bundestag, says we need 100% in order to have the capacity the military needs in order to defend ourselves. And yes, we have to rethink. That's why a European structure, like Macron says, we have to have a new framework to build up a European column inside the NATO in order to really strengthen our capacity. And it's not hypocrisy. It's really the bringing up or the joint forces we are trying to get as a European Parliament. The national member states don't want to hear that, but we are trying to push it.
Well, how are you going to build that European pillar if you can't agree on the shared threats that you face with your European partners?
Well, it's interesting, and there is an argument, and this is a wider argument, potentially an EU army, and as you've been remarking, kind of more EU solidarity when it comes to defence. But we have to leave it there. But we are going to stay with Germany, actually, for the time being, because it may be disappointing its NATO partners, or certainly Donald Trump, but it is stepping up its diplomatic efforts at the United Nations. Let's have a look. The United Nations Security Council, where the world's most pressing issues are discussed. And there's a new head at the table, Germany. It's taking over the presidency of the Security Council from France. On Germany's agenda, protecting humanitarian workers, arms controls, and promoting multilateralism. But things got off to a bumpy start. The German government plane that broke down with Angela Merkel on board last year, well, it blew a tyre upon landing in New York. And just in case any doubt, we'd like to confirm that that's not actually real footage of the plane. But it's not the first time it's got into trouble. It's a bit strange, isn't it?
Well, it is. I hope we get better on that one. But in this film, there was actually one thing which has not been explained, is that climate diplomacy is on our forefront. And on security, which was very great at the Munich Security Conference, there's a full-fledged approach having climate change as a security threat. Germany is bringing this on board together with Sweden.
And I assume that's something you'd welcome.
Yes, and we work actually together, hand in hand. Sweden did the first step, and we are doing the second one to implement a micro mechanism on that one. But security and climate plays in hand, and Germany is pushing that as well.
And about climate diplomacy and climate threat as one of the real security threats, that is something that the Swedish defence and the Swedish Parliament and so on, we have claimed for very, very many years that this is the biggest threat to us, and we should join forces to combat it.
Well, we'll see how it plays out. Guys, thank you very much. Interesting discussion. Thank you for joining us here on Raw Politics. That is it for this half, but we will be back in a couple of minutes. So stay tuned on Raw Politics and join us, well, as I say, in just a few minutes' time. Now, welcome back to Raw Politics. The European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker visited Italy today and increased tensions between Rome and Brussels. Mr. Juncker met with the Italian Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte in Rome, where they discussed migration and the economy. Italy and the EU have clashed over a number of issues since anti-establishment government was elected last year. And the meeting this morning, Mr. Juncker said he was slightly worried about the state of the Italian economy, but there was great love between Italy and the Commission. But not everyone welcomed Mr. Juncker with open arms. The Italian Prime Minister Matteo Salvini told La Repubblica newspaper that Italians won't take lessons from Juncker. He said in a quote that Europe has certainly not helped Italy in recent years. On the contrary, it has damaged Italy. Pretty controversial stuff. Joining me is Lorenzo Consoli, an EU affairs correspondent. We've also got Sirpa Pedietta Kanana. Almost. Who is a Finnish MEP with the European People's Party, and Shada Islam from Friends of Europe also join us. Let's start with you, Lorenzo. What did you make of today's meeting? How much tension is there genuinely between the government in Rome and the Commission here in Brussels?
Well, you have to consider that the whole narrative of Salvini in particular is based on this confrontation. We are Italy, and we have not been treated fairly by the EU in the last years, in particular on migration. We know better than them. We are, we have all the weight of the immigration coming to our coast, yep. And even if now migration is not a big problem anymore, we are not in the middle of a crisis. That has been so successful, that narrative, that he is really keeping the tension on this. So it is part. I mean, it's part of the populist speech to be always, the people against the enemies, against the establishment, and Europe is the establishment.
Do you agree, Sirpa?
Yes, I very much agree. And it's so saddened to look this gaming, because it's a bit the same story as with Hungary, Poland, Brexit in different forms. So about who teaches and who, about climate change or about the economy over-debting oneself, about migration, it's like I would say, don't teach me, it's raining outside. I know my best and I want to water myself. And the question is that there's a lot of this kind of factual problems ahead of us, and either we try to agree and solve them, or then we just say, okay, do not come to lecture to me. Let me make my mistake myself and destroy myself. Yeah, but this is not the European way.
It's not the European way, but is there a distinction, as I've kind of noticed, between actually what, you know, the five-star movements or potentially Giuseppe Conte saying on one hand, and actually Salvini? Is there a division in Italian politics about how to approach Brussels?
Absolutely. There's a division inside Rome, in the government, on how to deal with Brussels. But I mean, what Sirpa and Lorenzo are saying is the populist playbook that Salvini is playing by. We've seen it across Europe. I mean, when they want an enemy, hey, Brussels is there. They're the enemy, forgetting all the funding that goes from Brussels, all the help that has been given. It is true that on the immigration issue, there was money given, but there was no solidarity. There was no visible solidarity. Lots of words were spoken, but governments across Europe were actually not going there and saying, yes, our borders are also open. And it's true that Italy took a great burden.
But just as kind of Italy is and the migration crisis, in some ways they're looking for European help, many would say an Italian debt crisis and an Italian economic slowdown can spread elsewhere in Europe.
Well, the problem is exactly this. Migration is very important for the for League. No, it's not Northern League anymore. Liga. League, for the Liga narrative. But what really gives bad press to Europe in Italy is the austerity period, the way Brussels has managed the euro area crisis, the fact that Italy is the only country with Greece that has not completely gone out the crisis, and you know there's a lack of investments. There is a really depressive economy in Italy that cannot manage to take off again, and this is seen as the fault of Brussels because of the lack of public investments due to the austerity.
So it is kind of that common narrative that we find, as we say, elsewhere in Europe. Interesting discussion, and again, Italy and its clash with, I suppose, the Brussels Commission officials, given that budget crisis is likely to continue. Thank you very much indeed. We're going to take another quick break here on Raw Politics. But do you think Europe is overtly dependent on America for defence? That's and many other questions we want to hear from you on your call coming up at 7 p.m. CET. The information is on your screen. How to get in touch, pick up the telephone. It is 00800 333 3702. It's free. You've got no reason not to. Or you can get involved using the hashtag #RawPolitics on either Facebook or Twitter. Our lines are now open. Get in touch and join us in a couple of minutes here on Raw Politics. Welcome back to Raw Politics. Once again, it's time to hear from you. But before we get stuck in, let's find out what we're talking about tonight.
So the noes have it.
Yet another round of no's from the British Parliament, and now no deal is looking more and more likely, according to the EU's chief Brexit negotiator.
It becomes day after day more likely.
As businesses face continuing uncertainty, and Brits and Europeans alike fret over their rights, we want to know, how would a no-deal Brexit affect the EU? NATO is turning 70 this week, but the big birthday party planned in Washington, D.C. has been overshadowed by an increasing divide between European members and the United States, and doubts over whether Germany will even meet its own lower target to spend 1.5% of GDP on defence. So is Donald Trump right? Should Europe get serious about defence spending? And is it overtly dependent on America for defence? Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker says he's worried about the Italian economy, calling on the government there to do more to boost growth. Tensions have been high since Rome proposed its high-spending budget last year. That included a universal basic income and the lowering of the pension age. Is Italy just looking out for its citizens, or is it being economically irresponsible? Have your say, Europe. How would a no-deal Brexit affect you? Is Europe overly dependent on America for defence? And is Italy being economically irresponsible? Now, all of the contact information, as you can see, is on your screen. You can call us for free. It is 00800 333 3702. Email us at rawpoll@euronews.com. Social media, #RawPolitics, whether you're on Twitter or on Facebook. And you can search us on Skype, also using the handle rawpolitics. Well, joining us to discuss this, we've got Nathan Gill. He is a British MEP who sits with the party, the Europe of Freedom and Democracy Group. Still with us also is Andrew Byrne of the Sunday Times and Shada Islam of Friends of Europe. Nathan, let's start with you. Do you think Donald Trump has got a point?
Absolutely. I think the proof...
Of course you do.
Well, listen, the proof of any pudding is in the eating. If America tomorrow pulled out completely from Europe, could Europe defend itself? And the answer to that is no. So are we overly dependent on America? The answer to that is yes.
Shada?
Yes, we are at the moment, but you have to remember that we're doing things. Europe is engaged in building up its own defence identity. So we've got the structured cooperation, we've got strategic autonomy. And one thing, Darren, security and defence are not just about defence spending. It's also about development aid. It's also about foreign policy. Well, you know, so it's not just about money spent on buying arms, mobilising soldiers. It's also about how you create prosperity and development around you.
But, Andrew, there is at least a recognition that NATO's not quite as stable, potentially, as it once was. Europe's backstop, if you like. And let's talk about a kind of EU army. We've heard both Angela Merkel and Emmanuel Macron talk about that in the last 6 months.
I mean, the EU army comes up every few years, and it's kind of this pipe dream, and it allows politicians to sound very aspirational.
Is it more likely now, though?
I don't really see it happening, no. Okay. I mean, and I think the German government has even come out and said our definition of EU army is not army, it means something else, it means some sort of strategic concept. I mean, the risk of saying, you know, is Europe overly dependent on NATO is it leads to these conversations which say we can replace NATO with some kind of European common defence force. And they're just not practical aspirations, and also it risks duplicating spending that could be better spent, I think, within NATO.
Well, there we go. What do you think about that, guys? If you've got a view on that, or indeed a view on Brexit or anything else we're talking about tonight, pick up the phone. You know the number by now. It's on the bottom of your screen just there. And get in touch. We're going to be talking about that over the next 45 minutes or so. But first, it is time for tonight's Raw Moment. And just when you thought things in the UK couldn't get any worse, MPs in Parliament last night got a rather rude awakening when a group of climate protesters stripped naked, yes, you heard me, stripped naked during a Brexit debate. Let's have a look.
Would you agree with me? It's really important tonight that everybody believes the people's vote, absolutely votes for a people's vote, and doesn't get distracted by anything else.
I'm very grateful for the intervention, and what a great sight she is, focusing in front of me. Much more so than the peripheral vision that was tempting my eyes elsewhere. The naked truth is, Mr. Speaker.
I mean, you couldn't really make it up. I know they say the UK
it's
Parliament...
more and more surreal, isn't it?
Well, they say it's gone nuts, but there was certainly some of that on show last night. You know, it's direct action, though. But the response of some of the MPs was pretty funny.
I heard from some that apparently there were a lot of messy sweat patches on the leather seats in the viewing gallery that had to be cleaned up, which is you'd feel sorry for the cleaning staff. And also handprints, apparently, on the viewing glass.
Well, MPs were determined to look as many other places as possible apart from the public gallery. There we go. Strange things, Brexit and all that. Thank you very much to all our guests. Of course, we would like to hear from you now. We've heard from them. It's your turn. Tell us what you're talking about. I'm on Twitter at Darren Euronews. Or, of course, you can follow us on Euronews on Twitter. Use the hashtag #RawPolitics. But for now, until a couple of minutes, thanks for watching, and we'll see you tomorrow.